In this video, we're going to discuss troubleshooting and maintenance. First, we're going to identify a few common issues, database corruption, which was more prevalent in older versions of SQL or some with faulty hardware. We're going to have performance bottlenecks, which is pretty common. Most people have some kind of performance issue, whether it's a low amount of resources due to not enough money for more RAM or CPU or whatever kind of core you're using, and or maybe they haven't added indexes where it need to be, or maybe it's just some kind of non-sargeable query. Then probably the most common thing you're going to see is connectivity issues, at least from the DBA standpoint. Most people want to connect to the data, but maybe uh, don't put in the right thing in the connection string. So you'll be helping them out with that. Maybe one thing that I happen to see a lot is people will try to put in their Windows authentication in the SQL authentication. Uh, that happens pretty commonly, and we'll show you how to find those issues when someone's having those problems. Then hardware failures. These issues happen once in a while, but most of the time it's nice for a DBA to be able to find it. But unless you're also a sysadmin or a server admin, you're probably not going to be the one to fix it. Routine maintenance task. You got your database consistency checks to check for all the corruption. Then you've got your index maintenance. This actually is broken apart into a couple different areas. You can either set to reorganize or rebuild your index depending on certain conditions, say a threshold of fragmentation. Then you got your statistics updates. There's auto statistics updates, but a lot of times you'll want to rebuild your statistics every so often to make sure that they're as close to accurate as possible for your optimizer to make the best query plans possible. And then you're going to have your disk space monitoring and management. You want to make sure that there's plenty of disk space out there, because if your disk space dries up, your database is no longer going to work. Performance tuning techniques. First, you look at query optimization, uh, index optimization, configuration adjustments, resource monitoring tuning. So if you're looking at query optimization, you're going to think of making it as easy as possible for SQL Server to understand that. Maybe not using as many functions, or not using things like a sort or an order by. Uh, Maybe not using a wild card. There's a few different techniques in there, and it really depends on the query that you're using. You've got index optimizations. If you use the uh, missing indexes that are given to you by SQL Server, those ones usually don't have all the columns put in the order that it needs to be, but it'll just throw it in basically in alphabetical order and throw you that, hey, SQL Server would really love to have this index with all these columns, but it doesn't tell you exactly which order they would like it would use it in. So maybe even if you add those indexes, they'll never be used, or they're not the most optimal because you've got every single column in there, basically making another clustered index. And then we got configuration adjustments. Uh, Maybe you set your max stop originally to 1, and you weren't allowing your queries to go parallel, but now you change it to 2 or maybe infinite or 0, which allows you to do go infinitely parallel, and that really helps out certain types of queries. Then you've also got your resource monitoring and tuning. So there's a few different options on there. There is a performance dashboard. You might look at an older version of SQL Server had something called utility control point. We've got a lot of scripts that I'll probably show you in the next module. And then there's a lot of third-party tools that'll help you out with this, like SolarWinds. The troubleshooting process. First, you need to identify the problem. Say the SQL Server query is no longer running or it's not running quick enough. Gather information and analyze the symptoms. Okay, run it and maybe check the server to see if anything else is blocking it, or maybe check the query plan to see what order it runs in. Develop and implement a solution. Maybe you realize that something is blocking it, so you go figure out what's blocking it and figure out if there's some way to add an index to prevent it blocking, or maybe turn on RCSI, read committed snapshot isolation to prevent updates, and select statements from blocking each other. Then you can test and verify your solution and make sure that it's not tearing up anything else. So we are going to demonstrate a few common issues. I'm going to pull up SQL Server Management Studio. I'm going to exit out of this. So as I mentioned before, we've got what the most common issue you're probably going to find is a connectivity issue. Someone's going to maybe try to connect with an ODBC connector, but sometimes people are just trying to connect via Management Studio. So I'll show what kind of issue is going to pop up. Say I want to connect to this server name, this instance right here, and I'm going to try to use SQL Server authentication. I'm going to use Mike 6, and then I'm going to put in my password. And I'm just going to push connect. And this isn't going to work. There's something not going on here, right? And one of the best ways to figure out is go over to the connection I already have. As the SQL Server DBA, you'll be able to go over here and look, check your SQL Server logs, and see if there's been any failed logins. If you don't happen to see any failed logins over here, you might come over to security and check that you have failed logins coming over here. All right, well, not showing. Now, there should be failed login over here, and I'm not seeing it. So I obviously don't have something set up, but most of the time you're going to see a failed login over here in the uh, SQL Server logs. If I can get rid of all of these. Okay, refresh. Let's check to verify the security. All right, login auditing. Let's try that again. No rats. Now, I'll come back and fix this in the future. Until then, I am going to move on to the next issue. Obviously, you would have noticed that they were using SQL Server authentication when they should have been using Windows authentication. Windows authentication automatically detects their name, so if they wanted to use something, then you need to have a, if they wanted to use SQL Server authentication, they need to have something in the logins over here, like test or essay or something. This would be where you'd see a SQL Server authentication. The next one is security access. Very similar to the connection problems. You're going to see people say, hey, I can connect to the instance, but I cannot see DemoDB for whatever instance. One of the reasons is because maybe test of this one, maybe if it didn't have sysadmin, had a user mapping to no one. You gave it access to the instance because you created the login, but you did not create a user DB on the DB for demo DB. So whenever you're using you need to map it. It will create a user ID over there, and you can give it the read, write, owner, whatever you need to give it, and then they should be able to access that database as well. They can't access anything else unless you give them direct access or explicit access. If you wanted to give them access to everything, the same as you would have as the DBA, you just give them sysadmin. It's most of the time not the best way to do it, but if it is their instance and you're just managing it, it might be what they want. Next would be failed jobs. So say you have a job that's taking backups all the time. You run it, start at step. You're going to see, okay, this is awesome. Okay, this failed for whatever reason. So whenever you come over here, you can go over to view the history of the job. See, okay, it ran, unable to determine the owner of this login. The job backup could not obtain information about NTS Windows Group Desktop Mic. So see if that fixes it. Let's give it we'll do system. Should have access. Let's run this again. If this will have enough access. Perfect. So the backup has been taken now because we've given the correct access. You find the reason that it's failed inside of the view history and you troubleshoot it from there. Another issue is locking and deadlocking. One awesome script that you're gonna want to use, and I'm gonna have that in the next module, will be SP who is active. It is a DBA's best friend. It is a must-to-have for every single instance. So it was made by Atom Mechanic, and there are other things. I believe SP Who2 is on there by default. We'll get, and this gives you a lot of information out there. If you for some reason cannot have it on there, you can go use SP2 Who2 by default. But if you can, go out and you'll see in my next module the links. SP Who is active, install that, and then run it, and you'll be able to see live connections, not just every single connection, but what's actually running at the moment you execute this. So if you see a blocking session, maybe these have been running for a few minutes, 26 minutes to be exact, and you see that there's a blocking session 167. That happens to be because it's being deadlocked by this transaction that has not been committed. So first thing would be go figure out who's running this. The login name, it's Mike6. I need to go talk to them. They're running it from this computer. And you can see that they're running from Management Studio. So if you can figure out some of these details, you should be able to pinpoint who's running that. If you need to, you can go ahead and kill a connection, or better yet, you could just go back over to whoever got this and commit it. So if that didn't work for whatever reason, you'd be able to go over there and find the session ID, put 1 or whatever it is, and kill the offending blocker. Most of the time you don't want to do that because maybe some application really needed that lock. But if that is causing issues with the rest of everything, then you'll want to be able to know that you can kill it. Sometimes it won't allow you to kill, or it'll need to do a rollback. If it's been running for a very long time and it's been pulling a lot of data, it might take hours or just as long as it's been running to roll back that data. Next is storage issues. As I mentioned before, if you see that you're running out of space, your C drive is all the way full, then you need to request more space or figure out how to shrink or purge the data out of here. Maybe not shrink the data file, but it could be certain situations where shrinking is acceptable, especially if it's like your temp DB gets way too large due to a query that shouldn't have been running. Then you're going to have performance degradation. Sometimes you'll see some kind of query. Let's get this over here. You'll see that it's been running slower for whatever reason. You'll want to go check to see why is it running slow. Well, it's using a table scan. A table scan is not the best way to run a query, uh, especially if you're have to look through everything. So what would we do in this situation? I would probably add an index, or this doesn't even this is still a heap, so it doesn't have a clustered index in there. Probably go over here, set primary key, and then save that. After it's saved, you can come down over here to your indexes. Now you have a clustered index. Run this again. Clustered index scan, much quicker than a table scan, mainly because it sorts your data in line with the user ID. Now, if this thing had a where date, that might not help it at all, but you might need to add another index based off the date. But since you have the clustered index scan right here now, you're able to run, at least have it in some kind of order. Heaps are really good to insert data into, but not as good to update the data to, because it's got to be able to find the filter or where clause and figure out what it needs to change. Hopefully you have a where clause in there, or else you're updating every single row. And then we're going to have some kind of other issues, and those issues happen a lot too. And then the backups that we take are going to come in real handy when you restore it. All right, let's go back over to some of the best practices. Regularly backing up databases. As I just mentioned, if you ran through that update and you didn't put a where clause on there, there's going to be a lot of people having issues. You want to make sure that everyone knows that a where clause is mandatory for updates and deletes. Uh, the implement security best practices. You don't want to give everyone sysadmin. You also don't want to give everyone read a writer. You probably don't want to give everyone reader. Some people don't need the data to everything, and you need to make sure that you have some kind of system where you can guard your database, because there's a lot of times where people may try to, they do have a reader, and they decide, hey, I'm going to read every single row from every single column, and this happens to be a 100 GB table for whatever reason, and you basically lock up all of your production loads because of that. Monitoring server health and performance. You want to make sure that your server is healthy. You want to make sure it's patched. You also want to make sure it has plenty of RAM. You want to make sure it has plenty of CPU. You can look at some of those metrics. I'll give some scripts on that, or if you have a third-party tool, those are really good places to check it. And you'll also want to make sure that SQL Server looks like it's running quick. And I mean, a lot of times you'll use things like query store. I don't know if I have it enabled on here yet, but let's go query store. Okay, it is enabled. And you can check the regressed queries, or even overall resource consumption, and make sure that everything's running okay. Let's see what we have a little bit over here. You can see bulk insert. Uh, and then you want to make sure that you document your configurations and changes. It's a lot easier said than done, making, especially if you have a very large environment. But if you have a smaller environment, make sure that everyone knows these are backed up. This is where they're backed up. This is how often they're backed up. This is where those are stored. This is where who has access. This is what the data's for. There's a lot of good data that needs to be kept, and it's really hard to determine what you need depending on how in depth and how important that data is. But you want to make sure you have some way of knowing what that instance is for, what that SQL Server server is being used for. Maybe it has maybe it has an application, an IIS server. Maybe it has a whole bunch on there, and you want to document some of that information. You want to make sure that you put, if this is a test or production, you'll want to make sure if you put information like a description on there. And let's go to next. All right. So troubleshooting and maintenance are essential for ensuring SQL Server reliability and performance. Proactive monitoring and regular maintenance help prevent issues before they occur, and continuously update your own skills and knowledge to stay current with the best practices. So in this class, we're trying to update your skills, and we'll probably try to get you the most up-to-date scripts that you can use, but knowing the newest SQL Server features, you'll probably want to keep looking at some of the resources that I provide in the next module. These blogs and YouTube channels are amazing at keeping you up to date and keep you learning for, maybe you decide you're going to be a more advanced performance tuner, or maybe you're going to be better at high availability. There's just so many options in here. It's really hard to narrow it down in such a short class.